George Russell did not just lose points at Monaco. He may have exposed a pit lane system so broken, it punished drivers who believed they were obeying the rules. 5 drivers. 4 teams. 6 pit lane sanctions. And the margins were so small, some were measured at just 0.04 kilometers per hour. That is not reckless driving. That is not a driver flying through a dangerous pit lane. That is a number so tiny, it raises one terrifying question. Was Formula One enforcing safety, or punishing geometry? Russell went from a possible podium fight to 0 points. Pierre Gasly crossed the line third, then lost his Monaco podium after the race. Lewis Hamilton said he was not speeding. Oscar Piastri said he knew for sure he was not speeding. And Alpine went as far as physically measuring the pit lane after the race. But the most explosive detail is this. The governing body said the system had no irregularities. And that might be the biggest problem of all. Because if the machine worked, but the result was still wrong, then Monaco was not just a penalty controversy. It was the moment the drivers realized the system judging them may not understand the track beneath them. Subscribe to the channel. Monaco is the one place where Formula One pretends to be glamorous, while quietly becoming one of the most ruthless tests in motorsport. From the outside, it looks beautiful. The harbor. The balconies. The yachts. The history. The cameras packed into every corner. But inside the car, Monaco is not beautiful. It is narrow. It is suffocating. It is a circuit that gives drivers almost no forgiveness, and even less space. The walls are not beside the race. They are part of it. Every corner feels like a question the driver has to answer instantly, with no room to correct the answer if he gets it wrong. And that is why the Monaco Grand Prix can turn one tiny detail into a full-scale disaster. At most races, a small penalty hurts. At Monaco, it can destroy everything. Because passing is so difficult, track position becomes priceless. If a driver gets ahead, he can hold a faster car behind him for lap after lap. If he falls behind, even a strong race can become trapped in traffic. Strategy becomes a game of timing, patience, and survival. That is what makes the pit lane so important. A pit stop at Monaco is not just a tire change. It is a gamble with the entire race. Enter at the wrong moment, and you lose places you may never recover. Stop too late, and the field can close around you. Stop under a safety car, and suddenly the race can flip in your favor. But after this Grand Prix, the pit lane became something else. Not just a strategic weapon. A legal minefield. And George Russell was caught right in the middle of it. Russell came into the weekend needing control. His season had already started to slip away from the perfect story Mercedes wanted. Kimi Antonelli had become the dominant force, stacking up victories and stretching his championship lead. Lewis Hamilton, now fighting in Ferrari red, was sitting ahead of Russell in the standings. So Monaco was not just another race for Russell. It was a chance to stop the bleeding. A chance to recover momentum. A chance to remind the paddock that he was not going to quietly disappear from the title fight while his teammate became the story of the season. And for a while, that chance was still alive. Then came the pit lane sanction. A penalty for exceeding the 60 km/h limit by a margin so small it barely sounded real. Around 1/10 of a kilometer per hour. That is the kind of number that feels almost invisible outside Formula One. In daily life, nobody would notice it. A person walking slightly faster through a hallway could create a bigger difference than that. But in Formula One, a tiny number can carry brutal force. The penalty was 5 seconds. 5 seconds sounds short. At Monaco, it is a lifetime. But Russell's nightmare did not stop there. Because during the chaos of the race, Mercedes failed to correctly serve that penalty during his stop. Russell later pointed toward a software-related issue, but whatever happened behind the scenes, the stewards treated it as a failure to serve the original sanction. And then the punishment escalated. A drive-through penalty. At Monaco, that is almost catastrophic. The driver has to enter the pit lane, crawl through at the speed limit, and rejoin with no new tires, no repair, no benefit. Just lost time. Pure punishment. And on a track where overtaking is nearly impossible, that drive-through did not just cost Russell a few positions. It wiped out his race. A possible podium fight became 13th place. 0 points. A championship swing that Russell could not afford. And that is where the anger began to change. Because this was no longer just a Mercedes problem. Russell could have accepted a normal mistake. Drivers do that, even when it hurts. If he had locked up, clipped a wall, missed a braking point, or broken a clear rule, the frustration would still be intense, but the logic would be simple. This was different. He was not entirely certain why he had been penalized in the first place. And he was not alone. Lewis Hamilton was penalized too. Oscar Piastri was penalized. Franco Colapinto was penalized. Pierre Gasly was penalized twice. 5 drivers. 4 teams. 6 sanctions. All connected to the same pit lane. All connected to margins so tiny they demanded a second look. And that pattern is what turned the story from controversy into revolt. Because one driver can be careless. 2 drivers can make the same mistake. But when multiple teams, with different cars, different systems, different engineers, and different drivers, are all caught by fractions in the same unusual place, the paddock starts asking a different question. What if the drivers were not the problem? What if Monaco exposed something hidden inside the system? Before the race, there had already been a warning. Race control advised teams that drivers should take a wider line entering the pit lane, because the electronic timing loops could create an issue if the entry was taken too tightly. That detail is crucial, because it means this was not a surprise discovered only after the penalties arrived. The risk was known. But knowing a risk exists is not the same as making it fair. Monaco's pit entry is not a wide training ground where a driver can calmly choose from endless safe options. It is tight, angled, and unforgiving. The car is arriving from a racing lap. The tires may be worn. The driver is listening to instructions. Traffic may be near. The strategy may be changing. The limiter has to be activated at exactly the right moment. And now the driver also has to think about something invisible. The path between timing loops. Not the wall. Not the white line. Not the speed shown in the cockpit. The invisible geometry beneath the car. That is a dangerous mental load. Because Formula 1 drivers are already operating on the edge of reaction. At Monaco, they are threading a car through streets that barely seem wide enough for modern machines. Asking them to obey a speed limit is reasonable. Asking them to avoid a mathematical trap created by the pit lane geometry is something else entirely. And this is where Russell's role matters more than anyone else's. He was not just another angry driver on a bad afternoon. He was a director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association. That means he is one of the voices chosen to represent the drivers as a group. When he speaks about fairness, safety, and the way rules are enforced, he is not only speaking for his own Mercedes garage. He is speaking from inside the structure that connects all 20 drivers to the governing body. So when Russell's race was destroyed by the very kind of sanction other drivers were also questioning, the issue gained weight. His anger became more than personal. It became symbolic. Because the drivers had already shown in the 2026 season that they were willing to challenge the governing body when they believed something needed to change. Russell had been involved in major discussions earlier in the year about regulation concerns. There had been signs of dialogue, even progress. But Monaco reopened the wound. It reminded everyone that the relationship between drivers and the governing body is built on trust, and trust can collapse quickly when penalties feel disconnected from reality. The pit lane speed limit is not the enemy. No driver is seriously arguing that cars should be allowed to fly through a crowded pit lane. Mechanics stand just inches away from danger. Officials are nearby. Wheels, hoses, tools, and people fill the space. The limit exists to protect lives. That part is not up for debate. The debate is whether the system measured the real speed of the cars fairly. And that is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because the governing body reviewed the timing equipment and said there were no irregularities. On the surface, that sounds like a strong defense. The system worked. The loops worked. The transponders worked. The calculations were made. But the driver's complaint is deeper than that. They are not simply saying the machine broke. They are saying the machine may have worked exactly as designed, while still producing a result that punished the wrong thing. That is a much harder problem. A broken machine can be repaired. A flawed method has to be admitted. And admitting a flawed method is dangerous, because it forces Formula 1 to ask whether the penalties were fair in the first place. This is why the Monaco pit lane disaster became more than a sporting argument. It became a test of authority. When the official system says one thing, but several drivers and teams believe another, who gets believed? The computer? The car telemetry? The driver? The governing body? The rulebook? Or the physical geometry of the pit lane itself? That question was now sitting in the middle of Formula 1, and Russell was one of the drivers pushing it into the open. Because for him, the cost was not theoretical. He did not lose a small amount of time. He lost points. He lost ground in the championship. He lost the chance to leave Monaco with momentum. And possibly most damaging of all, he lost confidence that obeying the limiter was enough. That is the part that should worry the sport. Because when a driver enters the pit lane, he needs certainty. He needs to know that if the limiter is on, if the car is under control, if the entry is legal, then the system will judge him accurately. At Monaco, that certainty disappeared. And once certainty disappears, every future pit entry at a street circuit starts to feel different. Drivers may begin taking wider lines not because they are safer, but because they are safer from the timing system. Teams may build instructions around avoiding a penalty trap rather than simply obeying the speed limit. Pit entries may become slower, more awkward, and more complicated. A safety rule could accidentally make the process less natural. That is why this controversy matters. Not because drivers want softer rules. Because they want rules that measure reality. And in Monaco, reality was suddenly unclear. The cars had limiters. The drivers believed they were not speeding. The margins were microscopic. The warning had existed before the race. The system said it was working. The penalties still stood. Every piece of the puzzle created a bigger question than the last. And Russell, because of his position, became the face of that question. Was this enforcement? Or was this Formula One trusting a system that did not fully understand the circuit it was policing? That question would not be answered by anger alone. It would need evidence. It would need pressure. It would need Alpine's review. It would need Hamilton's public challenge. It would need the drivers to keep pushing, not for sympathy, but for clarity. Because if Monaco proved anything, it was this. A penalty can be written in 5 seconds. But the doubt it creates can last much longer. But the real explosion did not come from the first penalty. It came from what happened after Russell tried to survive it. Because in Formula One, a 5-second penalty is painful, but it can be managed. A team can plan around it. A driver can push harder. A strategy engineer can look for the right moment, maybe under a safety car, maybe during a stop where the damage is reduced. That is the normal game. But Monaco did not give Russell a normal game. His penalty became a chain reaction. First, he was punished for a pit lane speeding infringement so small it barely sounded real. Then, in the middle of race chaos, Mercedes failed to serve that penalty correctly during his stop. Russell later pointed to a software-related issue, which made the situation feel even more bizarre, because the original problem was already technical, and now another technical layer had turned it into something worse. Then the stewards stepped in again. Because the penalty had not been served, Russell was given a drive-through. And that is the moment his race collapsed completely. A drive-through penalty at Monaco is not just 5 seconds. It is not just a small delay. It is a driver being forced to crawl through one of the slowest and most punishing pit lanes on the calendar while the race disappears without him. He enters. He loses time. He gains nothing. No tires. No repair. No strategic benefit. Only damage. And when he comes back out, Monaco does what Monaco always does. It traps him. The cars ahead become walls with engines. The track gives no easy passing zones. The laps tick away, and the driver is left sitting behind slower traffic, knowing the result is gone. That is how Russell went from a possible podium fight to 13th place. 0 points. A race that should have kept him alive in the championship fight became one of the most damaging Sundays of his season. And the most painful part is that Russell could not even fully understand why the first domino had fallen. He said he was not entirely certain why he had received the penalty. He suggested there appeared to be an issue with the software. He described dropping from 3rd to 14th. And behind all of that was a deeper frustration, the kind that comes when a driver feels the punishment is bigger than the mistake. Or worse, when he is not convinced there was a real mistake at all. But Russell's anger did not exist in isolation. That is what made Monaco so dangerous for the governing body. Because while Russell was watching his race fall apart, Pierre Gasly was living a different version of the same nightmare. Gasly had done something extraordinary. He had taken Alpine, a team fighting for relevance in the new era, and put it on the road to a Monaco podium. He had handled the chaos. He had survived the restarts. He had crossed the line in 3rd place. 3rd at Monaco. For a driver and a team like that, it is not just a result. It is a statement. It tells the paddock that the work is real. It tells the mechanics that the long nights mattered. It tells the driver that the years of frustration can still lead somewhere special. And then, after the race, the result changed. 2 5-second penalties. 10 seconds added. 3rd became 7th. The podium vanished. Gasly's reaction carried the weight of that loss. He said there was almost nothing that could hurt him more. He spoke about working for 10 years for moments like that. He said Alpine had done everything right. He said the result had been taken away for unfair reasons.